Okay, this is a continuation video from the first one where we were discussing about this question, database question. And so we went through the first part of the setting, the question setting, and the information that's given to us. We were trying to understand the setting or the story. And then we also addressed the first question, which says outline the genetic evidence that canis populations have hybridized. So please refer to the answer in the previous video. In this video, we want to address the question after that. But before you actually watch this video, I actually would prefer if you had attempted all the questions first. Because this basically helps you to understand or to check whether you understand the setting of the question and the situation or the story here, and it will help you to understand whether you actually know the questions and what they are asking for, and in this way you are able to reflect back on your points that are strong and your points that are not so strong that needs improvement. And if you can do that, that would be very good, because that is the best way to learn, to know where you are strong and where you need improvement. Right, so if you've done your questions, then we will move on to answering them. So the first thing it says here, compare the genetic data for Southern Ontario coyotes and Northeastern coyotes. So what we have to do is compare. Then what are we supposed to compare? Compare genetic data. So what is the genetic data that we have to compare? This is the genetic data. This, and this. This is the genetic data that's given to us, and we need to compare. Now we have 3 here, pie charts, and we need to know which are the ones that we told to compare. We are supposed to compare the Southern Ontario coyotes and the Northeastern coyotes. So if we look up here, we'll see there's the Southern Ontario coyote and the Northeastern coyote. We can compare the first thing by looking at what it contains, and we notice that both of them contain the same thing. That is C1, C1, C19, C19, and C9, C9. They both have the same mitochondrial DNA haplotypes. So that is one thing you can state. Remember, when the question asks you to compare, you have to tell them what is similar and what is different. And in this case, you can say a lot of differences. For example, you can say that C1 is in less proportion compared to Northeastern coyote, or Northeastern coyote has got more in terms of proportion compared to Southern Ontario coyote. The similar, you can also mention about C19, the haplotype C19 and the haplotype C9. You can see that C9 is more in the Ontario coyote compared to the Northeastern coyote. So however you write it, make sure that you measure correctly, that you know which one is more than the other, and then just write them down, and you would have got 2 marks. So let's look at the answer and see if we are on the right track. So we go 23B, and it says there, both contain haplotypes C1, C9, C19. So we have got 1 point there. And then we are supposed to mention C19 here. It says that there's greater proportion in the Northeastern coyotes. Then it talks about C9 in greater proportion in Southern Ontario coyotes, and then there's C1 in smaller proportion to in Southern Ontario than Northeastern coyotes. However you mention it, which way you want to call it, or which way you want to write it, is up to you. But these are the direct answers that they are expecting. However, there are some students who may have a different perspective, and they may mention this. They may say that Southern Ontario coyotes or Northeastern coyotes have more haplotypes from coyotes than wolves. I think let's have a look. Southern Ontario and Northeastern coyotes have more haplotypes from coyotes than wolves. So that would be a similarity actually, if you look at it. Okay, so here, C19 and C9, if you noticed, both of them come from a Western coyote. And if you look at C1, they come from wolf. They come from the gray wolf. So what certain students may notice is that they have a larger proportion of mitochondrial DNA haplotypes that come from coyotes and less that come from wolves, and that would be a similarity. And so if you have stated that, then that's good. That is an observation from a different perspective, which which is good, because you have looked at it and you picked up on that. Then fewer haplotypes from other sources in the northeastern coyotes, or vice versa. So this one is talking about the other sources. If your other sources would mean that for certain students they are even more detailed. They will look into more how should I say, they'll be more specific, and they will look at the others. So this one, the others. So you can see there, northeastern coyote has very little haplotypes from others. Southern Ontario has got more from others. But however, in general, what they really want from you is the top 4. Okay. Next one. Next question, which is a 1-mark question. So let's move down. State with a reason whether the genetic evidence showed that the western coyote and the grey wolf have overlapping ranges. When I see the word overlapping ranges, immediately I would think about numbers like 0 to 10, 0 to 100, so on and so forth. But in this case, I don't think there are numbers. And so if I read this again, I would see that they want me to look at genetic evidence. Genetic evidence is what? So let's look at genetic evidence. This is genetic evidence, and this is also genetic evidence. And they want genetic evidence of the western coyote and the grey wolf. So if we look at western coyote and grey wolf, well, we don't find them here. This, again, like I said, please remember that this refers to the areas, the populations of an area. But this refers to the specifics, species, the grey wolf and the western coyote. So is there an overlap in their DNA information? Grey wolf has got C22 and western coyote has got C9 and C19. So obviously there is no overlap, and all you need to do is just to write that down, and then you've got your marks. So if we go back down here in the answers, you will see that if you state no overlapping range, since no haplotypes or C9 or C19 from the western coyotes is present in the grey wolf, which they didn't write here, but I will put it down here in the grey wolf, right? And then, or you can state that there is no, the other way around, you can say that no haplotypes. No haplotype, yeah, haplotype C22 from grey wolf in, I will put there western coyotes, because we are comparing grey wolf and western coyotes as stated in the question. So I would like to stick with the question and not change my answer, and that would be your answer. All right. Okay, now the next one, it says there, next question, the northeastern coyote has a more wolf-like skull features than the southern Ontario coyote. Suggest a reason for this difference. So northeastern coyote and southern Ontario coyote, northeastern has got more of a wolf-like skull. So let's have a look. We need to go back again to the genetic evidence, because if there's any difference in the features of any organism, it would depend on the kind of genetic information that they have in their cells, right? It would all depend on the DNA sequences. So based on that, I would like to look at the DNA sequences. And if I look here, I see northeastern coyote, which is supposed to have a more wolf-like skull. Then we see that the C19 and C9, which we noticed earlier, came from coyotes, western coyote. C1 came from a grey wolf. So C1 came from a wolf, and C9 and C19 came from a coyote. Same to also with the Southern Ontario Coyote. The difference is that we see that the Southern Ontario Coyote has got C1 coming from the wolf, which is a smaller proportion. The Northeastern Coyote, C1, again coming from the wolf, has a greater proportion. So this makes me think that because the Northeastern Coyote has got a greater proportion of haplotype from the wolf, therefore that explains why the Northeastern Coyote has got a more wolf-like skull features. And if we look back at the question and the answer, let's go to the question, the answer. So Northeastern Coyote has a greater proportion of C1 haplotype from the Eastern wolf. And so that is your answer. And then you got 1 mark there. Okay, right. And I think the next question would be the last question. Discuss briefly whether there is genetic evidence to show a common ancestor for the Minnesota Northwestern wolf, the Southern Ontario Coyote, and the Northeastern Coyote. So basically they're asking, give us the evidence to show that these the canine species from these 3 areas have a common ancestor. Give us that evidence. So then I need to find if they all have a common ancestor, then they need to have mitochondrial DNA haplotypes from one particular origin species. So I look back into the graph, I look at the pie charts, and I want to see that every one of these will have haplotypes from at least one of these origin. So if I look here, C22 is only found here. That means they do not share the same ancestor because C22 is not found in the other 2. And I see from Eastern wolf there's C1, C3, and C13. So I see C3 and C13, that's Eastern wolf. I see C1, that's Eastern wolf, and I see another C1, and that's Eastern wolf. That means that the Eastern wolf is the common ancestor. If you look at C9 and C19, you only see on these 2 here, but you do not see here. So therefore, the common ancestor is Eastern wolf. And I will mention specifically why I say that the Eastern wolf is the common ancestor. You have to mention that Minnesota Northwestern wolf has got C3 and C13, and Southern Ontario and Northeastern Coyote have C1 haplotypes from the Eastern wolf. So this means that they share the common ancestor. However, their haplotypes are different. Southern Ontario and Northeastern Coyote, they have C1 haplotype, whereas Minnesota and Northwestern wolf has got C3 and C13 haplotype from the Eastern wolf. So they have different haplotypes from the Eastern wolf. And therefore, if we look at the answer scheme, I hope we will not be confused. The answer scheme states here that all 3 show evidence that the Eastern wolf was their ancestor because they all have haplotypes from the Eastern wolf, correct. However, the Southern Ontario and Northeastern Coyotes have different Eastern wolf haplotypes. They were different from the Minnesota Northwestern wolf. Or you can state that the Southern Ontario and Northeastern Coyotes have C1 haplotype, while the Minnesota Northwestern wolf has the C3 and C13 haplotypes. And therefore, that's your answers. So now you can see that the questions are actually very simple. They're actually very easy if you understand them. But I think the most important thing is you need to understand the beginning part of the question, and that is the setting, that is the context that they give you. This part here is very important for us to understand, to read the details, because if we do not, then everything else that comes is going to just give us a nightmare. it's going to cause a lot of misconceptions. We'll be thinking about something else when they actually are asking for this, and then you realize that, hey, actually I could have answered this